They accidentally left me off the guest list. For the party I paid $13,000 to host. My sister said, "You thought you'd just make it awkward." Then Mom added, "It was better without you." I didn't argue. I just called the caterers, pulled every deposit, and reversed the venue transfer. Within half an hour, the food vanished, the lights cut, and their phones lit up with panic. I, 32M, thought hosting my sister's engagement party would be a chance to mend our rocky relationship. Instead, it became the most expensive lesson I've ever learned about family loyalty. My sister had been planning this engagement party for months, constantly complaining about costs and venue availability. When she mentioned struggling to find the budget for her dream celebration, I offered to help. Not just chip in, I offered to cover the entire thing. $13,000 for the venue, catering, decorations, and entertainment. She cried with happiness and hugged me, saying I was the best brother she could ask for. For 3 weeks, I coordinated everything. I spoke with caterers about menu preferences, confirmed the venue details, arranged for a live band, and even handled the floral arrangements. My sister would text me updates about guest count and dietary restrictions, and I passed everything along to the vendors. She seemed grateful, always thanking me and saying how much this meant to her and her fiancé. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening. I had taken Friday off work to handle last-minute preparations and confirm everything was on track. That morning, while reviewing the final headcount with the caterer, I realized something odd. The guest list totaled 47 people, but my sister had been telling me 48 all week. I called her to clarify, thinking maybe someone had canceled last minute. She answered on the third ring, and when I asked about the guest count discrepancy, there was this uncomfortable pause. She told me the count was correct at 47. When I pressed about who might have canceled, she got quiet again. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She mentioned that the head count had always been 47, and maybe I had miscounted. But I knew I hadn't miscounted. I had been tracking RSVPs meticulously, so I asked her directly to send me the final guest list to make sure I had given the caterers accurate information. 20 minutes later, I received a text with the guest list. I scanned through it twice, then a third time. My name wasn't there. Neither was my girlfriend's name, despite her being mentioned in earlier conversations about seating arrangements. I stared at my phone screen, reading through every single name again. Cousins I barely spoke to were listed. Family friends from my parents' church were included. Even my sister's college roommate, who lived across the country, had made the list. But not me. Not the person who had paid for every single aspect of this celebration. My hands were shaking as I called her back. When she answered, I asked her point blank about my absence from the guest list. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she said I wasn't technically supposed to see that list and that maybe we should talk in person. But I pressed the issue. I needed to understand what was happening. She sighed and said she thought it would be awkward having me there, given how I sometimes make family gatherings uncomfortable. She said I tend to bring up old family issues and create tension, and she wanted this day to be perfect and drama-free. I was stunned. I asked her when I had ever created drama at family events. She mentioned the time 2 years ago when I had called out our cousin for making racist jokes at Christmas dinner. She brought up how I had questioned our parents' financial priorities when they refused to help her with college, but bought a new car the same month. She said I had a pattern of making people uncomfortable by bringing up things that were better left alone. Her fiancé's family would be there, and she didn't want any awkward moments or family tension to overshadow their announcement. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I told her I couldn't believe she would exclude me from an event I was funding, especially without discussing it with me first. She got defensive and said I had offered to pay as a gift, and gifts shouldn't come with strings attached. She said I was proving her point about creating drama by making this conversation difficult. Before I could respond, she said she had to go, but that we could talk more later. The line went dead. I sat in my car outside the venue, staring at my phone and trying to process what had just happened. Then I noticed I had 3 missed calls from my mother. I called her back, thinking maybe she could help me understand the situation. Mom answered immediately and asked if my sister had spoken to me. I told her about the conversation, expecting some support or at least acknowledgement of how wrong this was. Instead, Mom said she thought my sister was making a smart choice. She said family events were always more relaxed when I wasn't there to stir things up. She mentioned that I had a tendency to make everything about myself, and that maybe this was a good opportunity for me to reflect on how I interact with the family. I asked her if she really thought it was appropriate for me to be excluded from an event I was paying for. She said money shouldn't buy me a seat at every table, and that maybe my sister knew her own celebration better than I did. Then she said something that cut deeper than anything my sister had said. She told me that honest truth was that family gatherings were just more pleasant without my constant need to address every little issue or make political statements. She said I should consider this a chance to let my sister have her perfect day without worrying about what I might say or do to make people uncomfortable. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, letting everything sink in. My own family had decided I was such a negative presence that they would exclude me from a celebration I was funding, and they felt justified in doing so. Then something shifted in my mind. I realized I had options they hadn't considered. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the caterer's number. The owner answered on the second ring, and I explained that there had been a significant change in plans. I told him I needed to cancel the catering order immediately and requested a full refund of my deposit. He sounded surprised and asked if everything was okay. I told him the event was no longer happening as planned, and I needed to pull my financial commitment. He said he could process the cancellation, but since it was less than 24 hours before the event, there would be a cancellation fee. I told him that was fine and asked him to begin removing the food and service items immediately. He said his team could have everything cleared out within 2 hours. Next, I called the venue coordinator. I explained that I was the person who had handled the booking and payment and that I needed to cancel the event rental immediately. She pulled up my account and confirmed that the booking was under my name and credit card. She asked if I wanted to reschedule or if there was a problem with the venue. I told her the event was canceled entirely, and I needed to reverse the charges and end the rental agreement. She said she could process that immediately, but the venue would be locked down and unavailable within the hour once the cancellation was complete. I told her to proceed. Then I called the florist, the band, and the decorating team. Each conversation was similar. I identified myself as the person who had booked and paid for services, explained that the event was canceled, and requested immediate removal of any items or cancellation of services. The florist said her team could collect the arrangements within 90 minutes. The band leader seemed disappointed, but said he understood and would mark the gig as canceled. The decorating team said they could have their setup removed before evening. Within 30 minutes, I had systematically dismantled every aspect of the party I had spent 3 weeks organizing. Then I drove home and waited. My phone started ringing at 4:17 p.m. It was my sister, and she sounded panicked. She said she had just received a call from the caterers saying the food order was canceled and they were removing everything from the venue. I told her that was correct. She asked me what I thought I was doing, and I explained that since I wasn't welcome at the celebration, I had decided not to host it. She said I was being ridiculous and vindictive, and that I couldn't just cancel everything on the day of the party. I reminded her that everything was booked and paid for under my name, so I absolutely could cancel it. She started crying and said I was ruining the most important day of her life over a simple misunderstanding. I asked her to clarify what I had misunderstood about being deliberately excluded from a guest list for a party I was funding. She said she had planned to invite me separately, after the main party, for a smaller family celebration. I told her that sounded like something she was making up on the spot, since she had never mentioned any such plan during our earlier conversation. Then my mother called on the other line. I told my sister I had to take the call, and I switched over. Mom was furious. She said my sister was in tears and that I was acting like a spoiled child who didn't get his way. She said I was destroying my relationship with the family over something petty and small. I told her there was nothing petty about being excluded from an event I was paying for, especially when the exclusion was based on character attacks and assumptions about my behavior. She said I was proving their point by reacting so extremely, and that mature people would have handled this with more grace. I asked her if mature people excluded family members from celebrations without discussion, or if mature people allowed others to fund events they weren't welcome to attend. She said I was twisting the situation and making everything about myself, just like always. I told her I wasn't making it about myself. I was simply removing myself and my financial support from a situation where I clearly wasn't wanted. Then I hung up and turned off my phone. Update 1. I kept my phone off until Sunday morning. When I finally turned it back on, I had 47 missed calls and 23 voicemails. The first voicemail was from my sister at 5:43 p.m. Saturday, begging me to call her back and saying they could work something out. The second was from my mother at 6:15 p.m., demanding that I fix the situation immediately. But the most telling voicemail was from my father at 7:22 p.m. He said he had just gotten off the phone with several relatives who were asking what had happened to the party. He said people had started showing up to the venue around 6:30 p.m. to find it locked and dark. He said my sister and her fiancé had spent the evening calling everyone on the guest list to explain that there had been a family emergency and the party was postponed indefinitely. According to Dad, my sister's future in-laws had driven 4 hours to attend the celebration. My aunt and uncle had flown in from 2 states away. Everyone had dressed up, brought gifts, and cleared their Saturday evening for this event. Dad said the whole family was humiliated and confused, and that I needed to call him immediately to explain what I thought I was accomplishing. I listened to a few more voicemails, some angry, some pleading, some trying to guilt me into feeling responsible for the chaos. My sister's fiancé had left a message saying he didn't understand what had happened, but asking if we could find a way to resolve things. I deleted all the voicemails without responding to any of them. Instead, I spent Sunday researching vacation destinations. If my family found my presence so disruptive and uncomfortable, I figured they would benefit from not having me around for a while. Update 2. On Monday morning, my sister showed up at my apartment. I could see her through the peephole, standing in the hallway with flowers and what looked like a coffee from my favorite cafe. I didn't answer the door. She knocked for about 10 minutes, calling my name and saying she just wanted to talk. She said she understood why I was upset and that we could work things out if I would just give her a chance to explain. After she left, I found a note she had slipped under my door. She had written that she realized she had handled everything wrong and that she wanted to plan a new celebration that included everyone. She wrote that she had never meant to hurt me and that the party exclusion had been suggested by her fiancé's mother, who was concerned about family dynamics she didn't understand. She said she should have defended me and included me from the beginning, and that she hoped I could forgive her mistake. The note ended with a request for me to call her so we could start planning a new celebration together. I threw the note away. On Tuesday, my father called from his office. He said he had been thinking about the situation all weekend, and he wanted to have an honest conversation about what had happened. He said he understood why I felt hurt and excluded, but he thought my response had been disproportionate to the offense. He said family relationships required compromise and forgiveness, and that I was damaging important connections over what amounted to poor communication. I told him that from my perspective, I had learned that my family considered me such a negative presence that they would rather exclude me than risk me making them uncomfortable. He said that wasn't what anyone had intended to communicate, and that my sister had made a mistake in judgment that she was trying to correct. I asked him why no one, not my sister, not my mother, not him, had thought to discuss this exclusion with me before the day of the party. I asked why it had taken financial consequences for anyone to acknowledge that maybe I deserved basic consideration. He said he didn't have good answers to those questions, but that holding grudges wouldn't repair the relationships or help anyone move forward. I told him I wasn't holding a grudge. I was simply accepting the message my family had sent about my value and my place in their lives. He said I was being stubborn and self-defeating, and that I was going to regret letting this incident destroy years of family connection. I told him that maybe those connections weren't as strong as he thought if they could be destroyed by me declining to fund events I wasn't welcome to attend. Update 3. 3 weeks later, I was contacted by my sister's maid of honor, who I had met a few times at family gatherings. She asked if she could take me to lunch to discuss the engagement party situation. I was curious about what she might have to say, so I agreed to meet her. Over lunch, she told me she had been present for many of the conversations leading up to the engagement party, and she wanted me to understand the full context of what had happened. She said my sister's fiancé's mother had indeed suggested excluding me, but not for the reasons my sister had claimed. According to the maid of honor, the future mother-in-law had been concerned that I might overshadow the celebration because I was the one paying for everything. She said the woman had worried that guests would spend the evening thanking me instead of focusing on my sister and her fiancé. She had suggested that having the financial sponsor absent would allow the couple to receive credit for hosting their own celebration. The maid of honor said my sister had initially rejected this idea, but her fiancé had supported his mother's concerns. He had worried that accepting such a large financial gift from me might make him look incapable of providing for my sister. She said the conversation had evolved into a broader discussion about family dynamics, during which my mother had mentioned that I sometimes made family gatherings intense by bringing up political or social issues. The maid of honor said this combination of factors had led to the decision to exclude me, with the plan being to tell me afterward that there had been a last-minute venue capacity issue. She said no one had expected me to see the guest list, and they had planned to invite me to a smaller celebration the following weekend to make up for the oversight. I asked her why she was telling me this information. She said she felt guilty for not speaking up during those conversations, and she wanted me to know that several family members had disagreed with the decision but hadn't felt comfortable confronting my sister directly. She also said my sister had been genuinely devastated by the consequences of the exclusion, and that she was hoping to find a way to repair our relationship. I thanked her for the information and told her I appreciated her honesty. But I also told her that the detailed explanation actually made everything worse, not better. Learning that my exclusion had been carefully planned and discussed among multiple family members, rather than being a spontaneous mistake, confirmed that I had made the right choice in removing my support. I told her that if my presence was considered so problematic that they would rather plan around excluding me than simply ask me to be mindful of the tone I set, then they had already made their feelings clear. The maid of honor said she understood my perspective, but she encouraged me to consider that people sometimes make poor choices when they're trying to manage multiple competing pressures. I told her I was sure that was true, but that I was also sure I didn't want to be in situations where managing me was considered one of those pressures. 6 months later, I moved across the country for a new job opportunity. I sent my sister a wedding gift when she got married, but I didn't attend the ceremony. My family still calls occasionally, but the conversations are surface level and brief. They've learned not to invite me to events, and I've learned not to expect inclusion. I've built a solid circle of friends in my new city who value my perspective and appreciate my willingness to address difficult topics when they arise. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted to the engagement party situation. But then I remember sitting in my car that Friday afternoon, reading through a guest list for a party I had funded while discovering that I wasn't considered worthy of attending. I don't regret my choice to pull the funding. I learned something valuable about how my family viewed me, and I acted on that information. They wanted a celebration without the disruption of my presence. I gave them exactly what they asked for.